All right, so since we've finished the elements that go with physical development, we need to turn our attention. So we've already done the physical development piece. We need to turn our attention to development. We need to turn our attention to cognitive. I know I repeated myself a number of times, which is a little annoying, but oh well. So cognitive development, and this particular part of development is fairly detailed because of the number of theorists and people that have gotten involved and helped us to understand the inner workings of the developing mind, if you will, or the developing cognition. Now, again, as always, we need to define our terms. And first of all, cognition itself refers to all the mental activities that are associated with activities associated with thinking, basically. Associated with thinking, remembering, knowing, and problem solving, ultimately. Memory, and communicating, which are all areas that we will take certainly a deeper look at. And so cognition, as a general rule, as a general category, is everything that's associated with how we think. That's where we get the word cognitive or cognition. The key person that you will hear talked about on a regular basis is a guy named by the name of Jean Piaget. He's a French developmental psychologist, and he proposed the idea that children develop something that he referred to as schemas. Now, we've talked briefly about this, and this is one way to think about this is that it's a kind of a box to put things in, or a category. And that's the key. And what essentially happens as kids grow up is that they develop more and more advanced schemas or boxes to keep things in. So you're sitting with a little one, you're reading a book about animals, and you help them to begin to understand that an animal, a dog, has 4 legs, a tail, depending on the dog, of course. Most dogs have tails, even if they're cropped. And it has a particular configuration. Well, essentially what kids will do is they'll take that schema, that category, and apply it everywhere. And what adults will do then is go on and basically make corrections to the schema. And so they use these schemas to understand and interpret information, and then when new experience comes along, they assimilate the new information, which is the process that Piaget talks about, is they assimilate the new information and accommodate accordingly. And so they assimilate from information, interpret it in terms of a new understanding, and then when they go to adjust, we refer to that as accommodation. Now, these are key terms in understanding how Piaget was talking about development. These are key processes. So assimilation and accommodation and schemas are the key components of understanding how Piaget actually went about understanding cognitive development. Now, the other aspect to keep in mind is that he was one of these guys that talked about stages. And his key stage at the very, very beginning, from birth to about 2 years of age, was something they referred to as sensorimotor, which really, when you break it apart, that really does describe the essence of what's going on at the time. The senses are developing. The child experiences the world through senses and through motor activity. So you give something to a little one, what's the first thing they do? They pop it in their mouth. Senses, taste is one of those senses. Motor, being able to move things smoothly to one's mouth, is also part of that. By about 8 months of age, we begin to see something that we refer to as object permanence. And essentially, there will be a video on the website for you to take a look at that demonstrates this, is that when kids are young and you hide a toy behind a drape or a blanket or something, and you hide it, they begin to scream because, of course, they think that they have lost it altogether. It's gone. As they grow older and their cognitive development begins to take hold, is that they begin to know that in spite of the fact that it's hidden, it's still there. And that's part of what we refer to as object permanence, is a key part of the sensorimotor stage. All right, so moving on from there, and I've got a new screen here so I can begin to fill it in a little further, so we have the sensorimotor stage. We move from the sensorimotor stage to the next stage, which is referred to as pre-operational. Sensorimotor, that's one. Number two is pre-operational. And the pre-operational stage has some key components to it. The first key component is something that we refer to as egocentricity. And kids, a lot of times, parents take this quality and turn it into being selfish. And there's certainly, I think, no one is going to debate the fact that the kids are selfish. They learn the word my and mine very early. But egocentricity is not necessarily the same as selfishness. It is simply seeing the world from my point of view. They have an inability to perceive things from another person's point of view. And along with this is something that we refer to as a theory of mind. And that really is part of the developmental stage here, where the person has the capacity to see the world from another's point of view. And that's what this particular component is the theory of mind. A second aspect of this is really the concrete stage, which is not second, it's the next stage. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the next stage is what Piaget referred to as concrete operations. And concrete operations has within it a couple different characteristics. One of the first of them is they understand something that we refer to as conservation, or conservation of mass, if you will. And so if you take a tall glass of milk and pour it into a saucer, kids before the concrete operation stage would say that the tall glass of milk has more milk in it than the saucer does because it's flattened out. When they learn this, they're able to understand that it is exactly the same volume, and that's why we get the word conservation. The last stage for Piaget is something we refer to as formal operations, and formal operations begins to move into more abstract thought. They can, in this stage up here, they can think logically. They can grasp some analogies. Certainly at this stage, they're also dealing with mathematical transformations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. All of these things are happening during this period of time. And somewhere along about the age of 12, we begin to see more abstract thinking. They can hypothesize. So they can hypothesize, which requires abstraction. And for example, if I were to have a kid that is in the concrete operation stage versus an adolescent who is in the formal operations, I could say to them, let's just say that I'm holding a piece of coal. And I say, let's imagine for a minute that I'm holding a snowball, okay, white. The concrete operations kid will say, yeah, but it's a piece of coal. See, they're confined by the world as it is. In formal operations, I can actually hypothesize, and the kid will say, all right, well, let's imagine that you can. What can you do with it, for example? Well, the concrete operational stage, they couldn't think of anything other than coal and how you would use coal. The formal operations, I can hypothesize that this is a snowball. What exactly could I do with a snowball? So all of those are key components. What's fascinating, I think, in some respects in understanding these is that when we do testing of kids, we use each of these terms to understand how cognitive development will proceed. And by doing so, we can have an understanding of the cognitive developmental age of the child rather than their chronological age. So cognitive age, if you want to put it that way, is very different than the chronological age. Now, let's look at a couple other areas that are involved with understanding cognitive development. I want to look at a theorist by the name of Vygotsky, Lev Vygotsky, and he is beginning to have more and more influence about cognitive development and our understanding of it. And then secondly, look at some of the current research in this particular area, and that will be on the next video.